In today's video, I'm going to be disassembling the rear portion of my 110 scale Traxxas Summit because in the last video, I stripped something. Now, I'm not 100% sure what stripped, but I did buy a few parts. My suspicion is the spider gears within the rear diff might have stripped. So I bought two new spider gears. Now, these are supposedly hardened steel, but this is what's already in there. So this is probably best case scenario. If these two gears stripped, I already have the Hot Racing spiral cut diff gear in the back and the front. I have an alloy diff cup in the rear. Now my hope is that I did not strip the spiral cut diff gear, ring and pinion gear, because I don't have a replacement of that. I'll just have to swap a stock diff in, which will not last very long, even on 4S. So this is best case scenario, but I'm not going to know until I disassemble it. So I'll resume video once I get this thing disassembled, which is probably going to take a while, and diagnose the problem. Alrighty guys, so fast forward a little bit, I finally got into the differential, and initially looking at it, it looks like this Hot Racing spiral cut diff gear, the ring gear looks fine, and it also appears that the pinion gear is fine as well. And I had those shimmed. I definitely have this shimmed up pretty darn good. That's why I was super surprised when something gave. So now that means I'm going to have to open up the diff and actually look in here because it's got to be something in here. Most likely the spider gears. But I'll resume video once I figure out more. Now I have the diff open, and the thing is I'm even more confused because I took out all the spider gears and all the spider gears look good. That gear down in there looks good. This gear right here looks good. So the only other thing I can think of is when I took this apart, this collar had come off. This collar off the Hot Racing center drive shaft. So this is a center drive shaft that goes to the output on the rear differential. But this pin had never slid out. So this is what holds the pin in place right here. I might like Gorilla Glue this on. I need to find some way to get this on, and you can clearly tell it was scraping something in there. And the other thing I noticed was one of these grub screws, which one was it? I think this grub screw right here was coming out. So it was the grub screw holding this end piece right here was coming out, but it was not all the way out. So that's why I was a little bit confused because we almost lost all drive to the rear. But you can see, because the grub screw had worked its way out, even though I did use thread lock when I originally put it in, after time, thread lock just doesn't hold, medium strength anyway. So it had worked its way out. The grub screw, I should say, was spinning around, partially slid out, and you can see what it did to the actual bulkhead. It was spinning in there and it scraped it up, but it was still in there. So since it was still in there, I'm confused that why we lost all drive. Maybe at some point it did slide all the way out and it slid back in. I don't know. But either way, that's all I can think that it is, unless it's a center transmission issue. But I don't think so, because we still had front drive. So I guess we'll find out after I put it all together and test it out. Anyway, I'll catch back up with you guys once I figure out more. Hopefully that's all it was. I'm starting to get this thing back together. I just wanted to show you kind of what had happened. So this collar right here came off and was slid down here. But it didn't look like that was interfering with anything, and the pin was still in there. So now I Gorilla Glued this on, so hopefully that stays. You can see how it was scraping up against something within here. But this was what was actually hitting. What was actually hitting was the grub pin, which I now put a small dab of red Loctite on, which is risky because I'm going to have to use heat to get it off. That was spinning around in there, but it didn't look like it came all the way out. So that's why I was a little bit confused, because at the very end there, we lost all drive to the rear. So I'm crossing my fingers that that's all it was, because I just took the rear diff completely apart, put it all back together because everything looks good. But getting the back portion back together is just a pain. But I'll resume video once I go out to test this thing. Make sure everything's good. Well, guys, I was going to record it, but I just took it outside, and there's still an issue. So then I came in, I'm like, is it the slipper clutch? I think a gear, something within the transmission actually gave. Because watch, I'll turn it on real quick and show you. The good thing is I do actually have another transmission. I have a brand new transmission sitting that I bought as an extra. So my guess is I stripped out one of the gears, and I believe all the gears in here are plastic. Let me turn it on and show you what's going on. See that? But I just made sure the rear diff is good. So it's something. Clearly it's spinning here. I mean, if I lift it up and I go slow, it'll still move the rear. The rear actually sounds pretty good until I start giving it more. That's all I can think is that it's transmission. So, it was not a diff problem, but it is still a good thing. I took that apart and made sure the diff was still in good shape, I guess, but it was time consuming. Now I have to swap the transmission out before we can run this thing again, but that shouldn't take too long. Hopefully that's all it is. All right, fast forward probably another hour. I swapped the transmission out and took it back outside, and guess what? The noise is still there. So I'm like, I must have missed something with the rear diff. So I took the rear diff back apart, and when I spun it, it spun smooth, but then you probably can't see very well, but there's a pretty giant crack in this end of the actual, I guess this would be the differential housing. And that is where the issue's coming from. The issue's coming from this right here has a giant crack in it, and it's bent this way. When I was doing it by hand, it was still moving smoothly, but I think as soon as I hooked down to the drive line, it was pulling down on this crack part right here, and that was making it like bind. So that's why there was an issue. So I basically need a new case, which I have another case right here. So I'm just going to switch the internals into this one, and then hopefully everything will be good. So pays to check twice, but I mean, it's easy to not notice that. You know, when you take it apart like this, I did not notice that. I wasn't looking that closely at the housing. I thought it was like a diff issue. So it's actually the housing that broke. The diff pinion's not coming in contact with the ring gear. So, plastic parts. I don't know if they have aluminum. There's probably an aluminum upgrade for this. I don't know. I've never looked it up, but I'll just replace it with a plastic one, and hopefully she'll be good to go. All right, guys, I'm outside to test it. I started working on this a little before 6 p.m. It is now 10:45. So that is how long it took me to, if my phone will focus. There we go. That's how long it took me to fix this thing, because I had to take it apart, do it again, because the first time it looked like the gears were good. So I put it all back together thinking the diff was fine. But the thing I failed to notice was that there was a crack in the housing, and the housing was bent. But when I did it by hand, it spun smoothly. But it must have been when I connected it to the drive shaft, the center drive shaft, that's when it must have bent it downward, which is why there was binding, and then it wasn't coming in contact fully with the ring gear. So got everything shimmed up, replaced that diff housing. So we're going to test it. I also replaced the transmission because I thought it was the transmission next. I didn't bother opening up the transmission. I'm like, oh, I'll just swap it out. Swapped it out. Turns out probably wasn't the transmission at all. So let's see if our diff is good now. I'm in the second gear, all diffs unlocked. Good thing the Summit has headlights. Sounds pretty good. Issue with the Summit is it's just not a bashing machine. Gosh, my phone keeps on losing focus. I apologize. It's been doing this a lot. Issue with the Summit is it's never going to be a basher. I can't really even trust it to hold up to 4S. But right now everything seems good. Until we break it again, that is. She moves. This is really how the Summit should have come stock, with 4S brushless power. I put 50 weight fluid in the back. Let's do a little bit of a launch. All right, seems like everything's good. Now that I got it all fixed up, just one word of advice, like I was saying, make sure you look over stuff super super carefully, guys, because it's super easy to miss stuff. So, you know, I probably wasn't looking at it from all angles, and this angle right here, as you can see, it's pretty well cracked. And it's at an angle, actually, like, it's still connected, but I can push on that. And that is the reason why we were having binding, and also why it wasn't coming in contact fully with the ring gear. So the pinion wasn't coming in contact with the ring gear because this is completely bent out of shape, which looking at it from this way, you don't really notice. So make sure to look your diff housing over as well, not just the ring gear and the diff cup and the pinion gear. But anyway, if you guys did enjoy this video and you feel like you gained something from it, learned something, go ahead, hit that like button, subscribe, hit that bell, and stay tuned for the next video, because we're going to have this machine out ripping again very soon.